Oh, hi, Donald. Good morning from here. And thank you so much for being willing to be part of this 50th anniversary interview process. We thought of you, Donald Jackson, because I remember back in 1974, some of our members attended the workshops and the lectures that you gave in Santa Cruz. And you were there was such excitement when the group returned from that series you gave, and they said, we've got to do something. Donald encouraged us to form an organization so that we could maintain this excitement and love for letters as a group, that we could continue to learn and benefit from all the visiting calligraphers. And so we wanted especially to speak with you now that we're in this 50th year, and for many of the groups in the United States, for the one in LA, the one in New York, and even in Ashland, Oregon, we are also celebrating 50 years. And
Well,
so
yeah.
we wanted to invite you to reminisce back those first trips to the West Coast.
Well, thank you, Virginia. Actually, of course, we all know that after 50 years, added on to 35 years or whatever it was, 36, the memory is not as quite so good as it could be. Some things are crystal clear. One thing I'm going to try to avoid is names, because although I can remember a chunk of them, I will also forget an even bigger chunk. And then that sounds weird to the people who've been missed out. But in fact, it's difficult to talk about. You mentioned the word seeds in a previous chat we had. And seeds have to fall onto fertile soil. And certainly there was a lot of interest and attention, and also depth of learning in certain individuals in the Bay Area, which had nothing to do with me. That was there already. And so in fact, interestingly enough, the only really, but from the UK standpoint of view, I didn't know what I was coming to exactly, certainly not in the Bay Area or Santa Cruz in particular. And but I began to realize that, others people had been, teaching students and for numbers of years. But probably not having the direct link to the arts and crafts movement, which somebody like I represented, because I'd been taught by somebody who was taught by Edward Johnston, and direct, just one generation in between, and also those crafts skills which had been kept or revived in Europe, and particularly England, because of that arts and crafts movement, which had an antiquarian basis, so they were looking back. So not altogether practical subjects. I mean, like calligraphy and illuminated books was hardly ever a mainstream, source of industry or activity in anywhere really at that point. But nevertheless, the art schools in Europe, in England, and still had some of the people that were left over from that, as I say, initial kind of roots. And so I was lucky in my timing there, because I was 19 when I was doing graduate studies in London with people who'd been taught. Two of my teachers who had been taught directly by Edward Johnson, Irene Wellington, and a guy called MC Oliver. But as I say, these are meaningless names very often to people. But I'd had a good grounding in it, and I was young, but I didn't want to do it the old-fashioned way that they had done it. So there was a kind of a meeting of, as it were, somebody was in a different world from when these guys went to college. Just as some of the people are in a different world now to when they're listening to these guys sitting here. But so timing, there was that, always is there, that sort of thing. But then what happened was I borrowed the fare, came to the US when I, in 1969, and left the family at home, did a 3-week excursion tour to New York, and met lovely, interesting people from the graphic design world there, who a lot of them were interested in calligraphy, but it wasn't something you did for a living. You did that because you loved playing with letters. Mm-hmm. And people were so generous, and professional people who can be, you know, quite sort of, in other areas, certainly can be very careful of, you know, introducing new people into their world of, you know, their clients and so on and so forth. But I didn't meet any of that there, and it was good. So I got the sort of hang of a few things. But when I got invited to come to Santa Cruz, it was nothing to do with that. It was entirely to do with my kids went to a school in London. Their teacher had been on a year's kind of exchange thing in Palo Alto, something like that. And he told me he'd been teaching at the UC Santa Cruz extension course. He thinks they might be interested in the sort of thing you do. And I approached them. I was, you know, hungry. I was looking for work, and I'd realized that, you know, in the US there was a sort of appetite for the kinds of things I knew about. So they set up a course, and I always did not know what I was getting into, but neither did they particularly. They build it as a kind of the Queen's calligrapher or the Queen's scribe coming to UC Santa Cruz, but nobody knew me or what I did or what that meant at all, if it meant anything really. And so just to get really straight to it, I've given you some of the background there, but I came in there, and the background was a 4 weeks of a study program. 1 week, I think it was italic or something like that, which is pretty much what everybody wanted to know about, and probably still does, or still do. And 3 weeks, traditional skills, illumination, and so on and so forth. And it seemed to catch the interest of, they did a great job of sending out, you know, flyers everywhere. And so on the day well, what happened, I just did one thing. They kept me informed about the people who had been applying. And we got to 31 or 2 students for the 3-week course, something similar to the italic. And I thought, well, I'd only ever talk in a kind of tutorial situation, you know, in the UK, because I did teach college there, but you're teaching probably 6, 8 students, you know, up to degree level, and you take care of them individually and so on, bring them along. So here we are, thrown into 30 odd students with really very little preparation. So I said, please get the applicants to send me pieces of talking about themselves and why they're coming to the course. Well, I mean, I got these so overqualified people. I thought, what am I doing? They don't need me. I need them. So because I wasn't aware of the wonderful US reality of getting students to know how to write a good story about themselves, you know. So and you know, you take a course in it at high school or even university, I guess, but I didn't know that. So they sounded so good. I thought this is. I was very nervous, and so when I arrived, of course, there was a lot we could learn from each other. I realized, but really, it's about that feeling. It's not just about an individual, because what I'm really saying, it wasn't me. It was already there. What happened was that out of those workshops, I mean, a number of things happened in them. I learned a vast amount, but came a sense of how great it was to meet up with other people who were just as crazy as you were at, about something that most people thought, was mad. And so it was a lovely feeling. But the key there is not what you learn from one person or teacher, but how much you can learn from your fellow students. And somehow or other, I caught on to that. I caught on to that was where, and so, and also sheer panic, because how do you deal with all these people with the tutorial kind of model in your head? And so we just got on with it, and the students helped themselves. I was sort of not that well organized. I mean, certainly wasn't organized for that kind of numbers. And in the middle of it, probably quite interesting from your point, the group in the Bay Area was concerned, was there was a one weekend where I think it was a 1.5 days or something, where it was open to the general public, and 80 odd people came, and seem to remember that number. Well, I was so ill prepared. I didn't even have, talk about AV. We didn't even, all these people were piling into the auditorium one lovely weekend, and there wasn't even an extension cord that could get the slide projector, remember slide projectors, couldn't reach it, so they couldn't reach the wall socket. So we're talking about a train crash here with a whole load of people there. So I ended up just having to be an entertainer for the most part, telling stories and this, that, and the other. And I don't know to this day how it was. The students had, I'm going to just stay with this for a little while because it shows you how green everybody was. During one of the coffee breaks, a guy, a very distinguished looking guy, I mean, it could have been anybody that we now know very well, and he probably doesn't realize, if he's still alive, what I'm about to say, but he starts talking to my wife at the coffee stall, saying, what rubbish this, we should get our money back. This is ridiculous. The guy doesn't know anything. And he was right. He was right. But there were enough people there who rolled with it, and we had a good time. And best of all, people looking at each other and thinking, wow, we'd like this to happen again. Mm-hmm. So that basically is it. There was a wonderful story that came at that moment. There was one of the things I will just digress just for this, because just to capture that moment of how we all felt we were on a roll, because I was telling a story that, quite an old story about how, which involved a Chinese emperor and a guy doing a painting, being asked to do a painting. He didn't do it. And so the emperor comes to kill him, basically. And so I've been leading this story up because he'd been practicing all these time, but he hadn't done anything. But the emperor was obviously a soldier as well. He didn't have a notion, but he did like this guy's work. So as I said, and we've been struggling. We'd had this trouble. We were looking for a cord to plug into the thing. Behind me in this auditorium is a big wall of wood. We pasted on some of the work of the students that have been doing, just, that was what people could see and so on. And as I said, and the door opened for the emperor to come in. And behind me, you hear this tearing sound of paper. And first of all, we look behind, and the paper of the work hanging on the wall, stuck with, Scotch tape, it's ripping. A door opens behind me, and out comes the janitor and says, who's looking for an extension cord? And right in the middle, he just came in absolutely, and it just was, the timing was so perfect that the whole place fell apart. And we knew we were okay because we were having a good time. And I did have very few slides to show of my work. So, you know, very bad in preparation. One thing that did happen, and this is an example of how the students started to help each other and help me. And so overnight, the night before, a woman who'd come from Baltimore, she could see the train crash about to happen because she knew the style of teaching that we were getting. I did actually hit upon in my panic a good way of dealing with 30 people, so that they then could start to fit each sideways rather than straight to the teacher, but to teach themselves. And she had seen, and she'd stayed up overnight and hand wrote a whole load of class notes from the previous time that we'd been teaching, including suppliers, where you can get ink, all the kind of stuff people really needed and wanted, which I didn't know. But I mean, I gave them the supply list, but I didn't know that it was so desperately needed. Mm-hmm. And that was taken away, disseminated, and that sort of information, like where you can buy nibs, where you can buy this, that, and the other. And as some of that made its way into the whole Earth catalogue, the second version of it, written up by a couple of gals from Berkeley, I think. Mm-hmm. I can remember one, I can't remember the other, that's why it's no good saying the names. And they must have used that reference material, and then it started to spread around. So there was that kind of happenstance of way. But the key to it was the kind of affirmation that people felt, because you know, doing calligraphy and lettering is so much an individual, solitary setup. You know, you're on your own, and people would go to the Y, they'd go to, you know, other classes and things of that kind, you know, at a level, very, very much beginner level, but it was where you go next. Mm-hmm. And of course, what happened at the end of this 4 weeks, some of the people there stayed for the italic and another 3 weeks to do this illumination course. Thomas Ingmar, I remember very much. It was, I think he was in the first one, mm-hmm. and the first 1 week course, and he came to the public presentation as well. I didn't even know how to drive an American car, so I didn't know that you had to put your foot on the brake before the damn thing the ignition would go on. And I can remember he and a bunch of other people wondering what was wrong with the car, and then suddenly realized that I didn't know how to drive away. I didn't know how to drive home. That was how green I was in the California scene. Anyway, the way we worked was, I took a look at 30 odd people, and I said, right, I'm not going to be able to individually, you know, spend 5 minutes with each one of you, you know, more than twice it. So let's group. Let's all. Actually, that's not true. That's one of those memory things. What happened is, I need to get to know you, is what I wanted to do, and you to know each other. So, say 5 nights out of the 7, because everybody, and that was the other good thing, everybody was staying on that lovely campus. I suppose there were a few local people, but coming in from the town. So I'd meet 6 people each night, 6 separate people. So they would each tell their story to me, yes, but to each other. So by the end of that first week, everybody felt they knew each other. Mm-hmm. You know, even though it wasn't the same 6, but you know, they had gone through that same process. And so that just happened to work. But it was born out of you know, desperation, really. How are you going to relate to people who are just sitting there waiting for me to just give them information? That doesn't work. So, and then when, of course, the practical work, everybody was going through the same misery, as well as, you know, because it wasn't working and all that kind of thing. And so there was a bonding there. And it's not that particular bonding between that particular set of people, it's just that each of them felt how great that was. So at the end, and this I suppose is the key thing, at the end of that period of time, there was a sort of blank look on everybody's face. What next? You know, not so much as when you're coming back, as what do we do now? And because I had been a member of a society in the UK from being, from being a student, I knew about that. I knew how good that was. You could talk to people and they would suggest things and that kind of thing. And so I said, well, what you need to do is something like this, really. But it was on the back of that sensation that people shared. It wasn't an individual teacher. It was their excitement that they brought to it, and they'd all made it more powerful by being together. So the mechanism, simple mechanism then was one, amongst the group, they got together and they appointed one person who would be called like a corresponding secretary or some title of that kind, whereby any information I got or I had available from Europe about people coming to the US or classes in different areas, because people would obviously get in touch with me in the UK from these states, but not with each other, because there wasn't an each other. They were all kind of not entirely. There were groups, but as well, there were also groups before. But so, and I said, well, we're just starting a journal or a newsletter now in litho, producing litho, a bit more professional, and I'll put in something called an American page, so that will be a few paragraphs of specifically aimed towards the corresponding secretary, really, just to let him know there were a few American people who were in the know in the Society of Scribes in England, just because they knew about it. Am I making myself clear here? No. Well, anyway, I started that so that there was, if I knew there was a class in New York or something, well, there weren't so many in those days. I mean, not. But anyway, some movement of things, anything that's going on, any supplies, anything like that sort of thing, talking about where you could get them in the US, that I'd learned because people had told me. So that went in. So that was just the beginning. And then it didn't take long. It just then became, its own thing, your own. But there was a hitch with that first workshop, insofar as somehow or other, you didn't have quite that right synergy of mix of people. Now you have been chairman of the FOC for and over the years work, and it becomes, the society is the people who work in it, not visiting people who just come and sparkle for a minute and then go away. You know what that's about. So there wasn't quite that right mix. I know Bill Davidson told me that, and there was somebody else, I think he was called, and hear me putting names in, Jack
Kennedy. Jack Kennedy.
Yeah, Jack Kennedy, yeah. So they tried to, and it didn't take hold, that first year. There was some, just canvassing and what should we do and that sort of thing. And then the following year, the 74 workshop, there was more local input from the Bay Area. The first one had people from New York, from Canada, all over, because of the great sort of advertising thing that the university did. Yeah. So it was a really colourful group of people, very much so. And very grown-up people, people who just used to getting on and doing stuff and making things happen. But not that first year, and this is probably, as you see, you're nodding, so it coincides with what you know already about Jack and Bill. And the second time around, we had a similar kind of thing, because they'd already started the group in LA. Yeah. Following, that fall, they'd started to get together, because you just happened to have organizing people who were yeah, and they were confident in doing it. And there were two chairpersons then, and one of them. There we are. I'll start fading on names if I start. But there was a healthy kind of. But they also benefited from the overspill of the excitement that I brought in myself to LA, because I went down there and spent 2 or 3 days. Some people set up a weekend workshop and a talk, and when I gave that talk, it was after I'd been through that process with you guys further north, and it took root, and charged ahead there. But the person, I will say his name, Don Moy, was the person was really sensible thinking guy, and we talked, and I said, well, why don't you go and become chairman of this thing? And he said, no, there are several reasons why not. So I don't see how that I could help. So I remember saying to him, I don't know if he remembers it now. It doesn't matter, because I could be wrong anyway. And everything I say could be wrong. Believe me, that's right. I said, well, you know what? Speaking as a chairman of a society at the moment, the person who has the most power is the one who has the most knowledge. And the person with the most knowledge is the secretary. So if you were willing to be a coordinating secretary who assists, the people who are more likely to take on the job of the, administration and so on, that will be a very helpful role. And true enough, he I don't know how that turned out for you, but certainly it appeared that he wrote some very, very good stuff in a kind of newsletter. And I thought very good. He also wrote some stuff quite critical of me, which stung a bit at the time, but fair enough, probably well deserved. But nevertheless, he was serious, like a proper critic type of a person. And so speaking of which, a nice thing that happened, I just come into my head, because being criticized, because actually I think it was Sumner Stone, right? Yeah. When you had the early days, you had the newsletter going and so on. He'd been given the task of covering a talk I gave. I must have been coming through, because I didn't do any more workshops really in that Bay Area, really from '74. I came back, but I didn't actually. Oh no, that's not true. I did. Had a nice group of people, including Georgianna, actually, at Mills College for 1 week, and that was good fun. But I hadn't realised how nervous she was, actually. I mean, she will probably, but she certainly was. And actually, Blackman, John? Alan Blackman, he was there. And at the end of the week, he said to me, I have a confession to make. And I said, what's that? He said, well, when I joined, the night before I came on the course, I made a vow that I would be silent for the whole week, which included not being able to tell the teacher that you weren't talking to him simply because you'd made a vow, but he did that anyway. And so I'd been talking to him and wondering, where is this stuff going? Because it's just not going anywhere, and it wasn't coming back out at me. But there we are. That was Alan. I mean, that was the kind of thing he would do, and he did it. Anyway, I have to digress rather more now, but that's those early times. But as far as the society was going, from where I was looking at it, it was like, well, no, it wasn't sort of an ongoing relationship really that we had much, because to start with, there was quite and this is quite serious, and how your society affected me in a way coming forward was that the idea of bringing in instructors from, well, and that was one of the things I believe I encouraged, because I thought, well, you know, you need to get more, you need to import the stuff if you can't, you know, and then bring people together. And of course, that what the turn that took in with your group and with Georgianna, I think was quite influential in this, was it to bringing in people from Europe, Germany, and you know, Austria and places like that, which was a great idea. But it also meant that when I was coming over to another place, you know, say not on the West Coast, and said, would anybody like a workshop? Well, no, they didn't, because they were having somebody from somewhere else. And I thought, so that stung. But it forced me to realize that, because there is that temptation when, you know, because I did have a sort of role. It's true. I mean, I did have a kind of job, which was to proselytize and teach as well. And if you're not careful, there becomes a sort of slight sense of personal ownership of what you think's happening, and or, you know, not thought through, you know, but it made me realize, and people were sort of saying, well, we'll never know how this got started, but, and this was within like 3 years or something. And I thought, and then I realized that that was something you have to let go of, that feeling of ownership of anything like that. Because what happens if the best thing of all is when somebody is doing something because they were told by somebody else, you told somebody else, maybe at some point, and they'll never know how that came about, that this particular angle of looking at something was there. And that is the real strength of it. And that was a real lesson for me, that, you know, anything that happens, happens. And it's not something you can really take personal, you know, I suppose you could take some pride in some things. One thing I do take pride in is Sumner, I started to say this earlier, Sumner Stone was dispatched to listen to a talk I was giving in Berkeley, I think. And he was supposed to cover it, you know, and to write a you know, nice sort of a précis of it. And when it came out, it just was like 2 sentences, which said, I went to cover this talk, and I found I just couldn't do it. You just had to have been there. And that was it. And that, I thought, that was one of the nicest things anybody had to say. There's no point taking notes. You just have to be there and be in that moment, that time. And so I suppose that's a particular kind of temperament, which helps in circumstances where you're kind of trying to get people loosened up and move on. I did soon after that, this is not necessarily San Francisco area knowledge, I just thought, I just grew not to like myself somehow or other, because I could do it. I could get people excited, I could make them laugh, and I could get them serious, thinking seriously at the same time. And I began to see myself, it was almost like, it wasn't a technique, it was just being normal and being there and reacting to the group. But I did sort of think, there's not a feeling I like this, but it feels like I'm almost manipulating the situation. And I read years afterwards, one of your kind of great entertainers, a woman, a film star and dancer and everything else, and she used to put on theatrical performances, and she one day said, I hate myself because I know I can make them laugh and I can make them cry, and I don't like that. That's not a good, it feels like I'm you know, manipulating folks. And she dropped out. But then she wrote a book. It was quite, I wish I could remember her name. She's famous, but so famous I can't remember. And she said, wait a minute, people enjoy themselves. I'm helping them to enjoy themselves. all right, you might be applying technique, you might be timing, you might know what order to do things in. And somehow or other, it gave me a little, it let me off the hook a bit then. But I did stop. And it became 76, 7. I came to LA for a year, and part of that was some lecturing. Then in 81 rather, I wrote a book, and the publishers had me on a book tour. So that made me do the rounds again. And I did come in your direction then. And then after that, there was an exhibit, 88, that went around the States, didn't come to the Bay Area, went to Santa Clara.
Yes.
And then and then of course there were the international conferences, that sort of took me in other directions. And then eventually well, I suppose then the Bible came along, and that was, that's 15 years of our lives gone, Mabel's life and mine, and everybody else is around. But anyway, I've always been proud to be an honorary member of the group. I get the journals, and very smart they are, very interesting, the content, and stimulating for me. And if I were a better correspondent, I'd have said that to Carl more often. But
well, he's gonna hear it from you right now. he'll have it on. He can push the button and hear it. But
great.
Yeah. We had our 50th anniversary picnic celebration yesterday, and so it's just so appropriate that we get to hear from you. It's part of our celebration, because having been at the inception of the Friends of Calligraphy, I had that sense of excitement. I felt it. And so I wanted newer members that didn't have that opportunity to be at that time to hear from you and get that sense of excitement, because I can still feel the buzz when you came back. I was so excited because I mean, that, you really were the stimulus. Although, people were pursuing their lettering, their love of lettering, it coalesced into a wonderful group. And, I think it's to have been there at the beginning, Donald, with New York and LA and in the Bay Area, that,
it was a bit of a wave, mind you. Lloyd Reynolds, of course, is the name that, the teacher that sowed a lot of seeds, which grew.
In Oregon.
In Oregon, indeed. And with good students like Jackie Savarin, and obviously
and Georgianna, they were all students of law.
But interestingly enough, I enjoyed meeting him, and he came to a class I gave there. He wasn't too keen on other people coming in to as it were, digress from the main object, which was to civilize the world by becoming people who could write it nicely in italic, preferably. And a great aim, and he was very successful in many ways in that. And however, he was a little bit reserved. And there was another reason I found out afterwards that he told me himself, because they had sent to read, among other places, this is UC Santa Cruz, about this guy coming from England. And but actually they'd sent the brochure. I'm going on rather too long now, but they sent the brochure that had been created in-house in their office, and they got the young student assistant to write Queen Scribe in his best italic. And of course Lloyd assumed it was me that had done the artwork, and I know this, sure, because he said, well, I said, if this is as good as this guy is, then I don't think it's worthwhile anybody going down south to go to Santa Cruz. And so they sent one lady who was, I think, a senior kind of member of their gang up there. And she came for the whole 3 weeks, or at least one, and did all of the work. But unfortunately, she was probably one of the least successful students. She had a great difficulty coping with the gold leaf and things like that. Most people do, but I mean, she particularly did. And of course, then when she went back, so I thought, well, hang on, what she learned that was not good. So I didn't have great. There wasn't much hope placed on me in Portland, but in fact, we all got on very well eventually and had a good time. So there we are. So I'm just looking at a couple of notes here because these can be added in or taken out.
Add anything that you would like.
Well, I suppose I hadn't thought of this. It just came to me. It's not in my notes. It's probably going. Well, I'm just looking back, and I think people like Thomas, naturally, who was in amongst some of those. He already got the bug with, I think, Lance Goins or others that he, I remember him being taught by, classes he'd gone to. And looking back, to know that you guys, you have kept these things going, that this is a kind of our craft or our joy in lettering is also extremely painful one. It's a painful kind of satisfaction somehow or other. It's, you lose it. Things go wrong more often than they go right somehow, but you keep going. And when I think that you all are doing this and have created it, carried it going for half a century, I'm rather also relieved that I've managed to stay the right side of the grass, as the Irish say, for that long. So I'm able to see this and enjoy it and feel part of it too. As you said, we'll never forget the buzz, that shared buzz. And long may it continue, and it's in good hands and other people, and it will have a life of its own, continue whatever it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Donald. We so appreciate you being with us, now that we're celebrating, and also working through the time zone for us and through this new technology of Zoom.
Well, when we've got experts work getting it right, when it works, it's fine, as they always say, isn't it?
Thanks to Andy and Juso Greenwood,
Indeed,
it happened. And thank you so much. So grateful and so happy we're here to celebrate.